I think when we talk about playability for a miniature forest, we're talking about high canopies and a tree count that is dense enough to make it look dense but still have plenty of room for the miniatures. With about 3 hours of work, I made this whole set, and I'll show you how I did it. Hello everyone, Wylock here. Thank you for joining me. I made some forest scatter terrain and I'd like to show you how I made it. Now the first piece to making forests is making good looking trees. My secret to crafting good looking trees is don't. Seriously, I have watched Luke's APS, I've watched Redbeard Baron, Luke Towen, and countless other tutorials out there on YouTube, and I've never been able to produce anything remotely close to the quality that they come up with. It either crumbles apart despite 5 layers of sealant. Here's a picture of something later in this episode. You can see one of the ones from the past that I tried to do. It just looks like foam with sawdust on it. It doesn't look like a tree. So I said, forget it, I must have an Achilles heel. I'm gonna go a different way. And remember that our sponsor is Heroes Horde for you 3D printers out there. Excellent selection, including all True Tiles lines. On my Christmas wish list, I had put a whole bunch of different brands of scale model trees, mostly for railroading. But what you're looking at here is an assortment of about a total of $20 worth of pre-made trees that look fine enough for my purposes. Different colors, shapes, sizes. And I'm sure some of these species would compete or not grow near each other, but I really don't care. I don't think my players are going to either. That said, they are still a little fragile. The clump foliage comes off with a bit of a rub, so I took some watered down Mod Podge, white Elmer's glue would work too, and just gave them a healthy coat and let that dry overnight. For the bases, I wanted to use something that was more than just a few millimeters thick. And also, I'm out of foam board and have been for quite some time. Get it together, Dollar Tree! So I'm using XPS foam, and I milled it down in my Proxen hot wire table. So these are like 8 millimeters thick or something like that. Then I hot glued them to chipboard. This is Graphics Medium chipboard. I use it on the channel all the time. It is my favorite crafting material. And I'm using it here for strength. XPS foam can crack, so having it on this substrate will create some serious durability. With my knife pretty far extended, I cut a very shallow taper around all the edges. And then rather than use Sculptamold, I created texture just by using a lighter and briefly holding it in different spots. If you move quickly, this just sort of deforms it. It will not burst into flames. That said, kids do not do this without adult supervision. So that just creates some nice pockmarked unevenness to the ground. And now it's a matter of attaching the trees, so I kind of pre-puncture in the foam where the trunk is going to go, and then inject it with hot glue and stick the tree in. It's really that simple. I also hot glued on some rocks from outside. These are just landscaping river rock. Then I paint a thick layer of white PVA glue all over the ground. Probably should have done this before putting the trees in. It would have been a lot easier. Anyway, I flocked that with different sizes of pebbles and construction sand. You really can't go wrong. And once that's totally dry, I base coated with burnt umber, making sure that the brush is heavily watered before dipping in the paint so it mixes on the piece, and then capillary action helps it really sink into all that sand. As expected, once dry, the next day that has some serious warp to it, so on the underside I painted a thick layer of white PVA glue and left it to dry upside down another day. Yes, using MDF boards would be a lot easier, but I didn't have MDF. I think most of you might not, and I don't like using power tools for my crafting. The rocks just get a nice solid coat with a medium gray, and then an overbrush with a light gray. Then the whole ground and the rocks get a dry brush with a khaki color. And I tamp it all back down with a black wash. This is something like 1 part black acrylic paint to 10 parts water. Now from here, it's just flocking the base with whatever you like. Again, you really can't go wrong here. I'm sure if you wanted to make realistic terrain, there's colors and textures you ought to use, but I just pulled whatever stuff was left on my shelf and had some fun with it. So I got clump foliage, and I've got these sprout things, and this dark static grass. I don't have a static applicator, but I'm just gonna glue it on there. Now lastly, some of these trees are from my old attempts where I used armatures and fuzz and homemade sawdust flocking, and some of the greens aren't very good. They're like a jade green on the blue side. I would like them to be more of a yellowish green. There's also some spots that just aren't covered at all. So I dumped a bunch of Flow Aid, and this is a medium green foliage, so I assume that's good to go. Just a craft paint into my airbrush and went nuts. Full throttle to cover up and retint all the trees that didn't look quite right or were too vibrant. Some of those ones out of the box are like a lime green, and that was a little too intense. So let's look at a forest scene all set up. Here's a caravan that's coming through a mountain pass down into the forest below. I really need to invest in a gimbal for this camera. So there's a lot going on in this forest. I have an owl in a tree there, and there's some spiders. Our intrepid party is over here spying. Maybe they're waiting for the caravan to come through. Over here is an ogre and a couple of goblin lackeys coming down out of the mountains. So again, there are great tutorials out there if you're interested in professional, realistic looking trees, but if you're going for speed and ease and durability, well then hopefully you got something useful out of this. If you're digging that Duragar caravan in the middle there, that's from a previous episode. I'll throw a card on the screen. You can also see this set in action in a battle report that I posted like a day or two ago, depending when I get this video out. It was a game of Grimdark Future that I played with my wife. Because I did this project during the coronavirus pandemic of 2020 and no one else is allowed over the house right now. And also, as far as citations, there's links in the video description below for the creators that I mentioned earlier. So now I have a nice serviceable set of forest scatter terrain for my tabletop gaming needs. Not terribly realistic, but it took a few hours to do and it was fun. If the idea of crafting for your tabletop games is new, you should know I'm not alone. Go to the Tabletop Crafters Guild on Facebook. We would love to have you. 33,000 members strong and growing. If you liked this particular project, then here's two more that I think you're going to like. And until I see you next time, I'm Wylock. Thanks for joining me. Make things and play games.